And here's my mom, Leah, demanding attention again, she says. The voice is honey poured over shards of glass. My daughter's voice. The world is a bright, blurry tunnel. And at the end of it is the unblinking black eye of her phone. My own living room floor is a glacier, cold and hard against my cheek. The pressure in my chest is a vice, squeezing the air from my lungs, one agonizing turn at a time. I try to speak, to say, Jessica, help. But the words dissolve into a dry, rasping sound. She flips the camera to her own face, a perfect mask of concerned exasperation. You guys, I just can't, she sighs, her voice a practice performance for the invisible audience she values more than me. Every time I have something important to do, she pulls a stunt like this. It's a lot. Her thumb swipes across the screen. I can hear the faint, tinny pings of validation, the currency of her world. My pain is her content. My potential death is her engagement. My hand, gnarled with the 72 years of life I've lived, clutches at the thin fabric of my blouse, right over my heart. The hammering inside is frantic, a trapped bird beating against my ribs. I can see the dust bunnies under the sofa. I can see a small stain on the rug from when my grandson Leo spilled his juice last week. Such mundane details in a moment of sheer terror. Mark, my son-in-law, saunters into the frame. He doesn't look at me, not really. He glances down as one might glance at a piece of furniture that's been knocked over. His lips curl into a smirk. If she can't get an Oscar for this, I don't know who can, he says, his voice loud and clear for the live stream. He nudges my leg with the toe of his expensive sneaker. A jolt of fresh pain radiates up my side, but it's the casual contempt that truly steals my breath. Jessica giggles. A light, airy sound that feels like a physical blow. Oh, Mark, you're terrible, she chirps to her phone. Don't encourage her. A cascade of laughing emojis floods the comments on her screen. A silent, jeering crowd. I am a joke. A meme. A hashtag waiting to happen. The date stamp she's overlaid on the video glows in the corner of my vision. October 14th, 2025. This is the day my dignity died. I close my eyes. I remember a different Jessica. A little girl with scraped knees and a tangled mop of blonde hair, crying into my shoulder because a bee stung her. I remember holding her, whispering that I would make it all better, that I would always be there to protect her. Where did she go? When did she get replaced by this cold, hollow stranger who films her mother's agony for sport? The live stream ends. The phone is lowered. The performance is over. The silence that fills the room is heavier, more suffocating than the noise. Jessica sighs, a sound of genuine annoyance this time. Okay, Mom. You can get up now. I have a brand call in 5 minutes. She walks away. Mark follows. They don't look back. I am left on the glacier, alone with the dust bunnies and the frantic bird in my chest. The pain slowly, grudgingly begins to recede, but the humiliation leaves a stain that I know will never wash out. It was 3 days later, after 2 more nights of the vice squeezing my chest and a dizzy spell that nearly sent me down the stairs, that Jessica finally relented. Not out of concern but out of irritation. She'd huffed. Fine. I'll make an appointment. But if this is another one of your games, I swear to God. The threat hung in the air, unfinished but understood. The doctor's office smelled of bleach and fear. It was a sterile, impersonal space, all muted grays and beige. I sat on the crinkly paper of the examination table, my thin sweater pulled tight around me. Dr. Evans was a kind man with tired eyes. He'd been my husband David's doctor for years. He spoke to me, not at me. He looked me in the eye. He clipped a film onto the light box on the wall. It was a picture of my own brain, a gray and white maze I didn't recognize. He tapped a slender finger on several small star-like white smudges. These are lesions, Leah, he said, his voice gentle but firm. Scar tissue. The MRI confirms what I was afraid of. It's a progressive neurological disorder. The chest pains, the dizziness, they're symptoms. We need to start treatment immediately. A strange calm washed over me. It wasn't a trick. It wasn't in my head. There was a name for the traitor inside my body. There was a reason. The validation was a small, cold comfort, but it was something. Okay. I whispered, the word barely audible. What do we do? Just then the door swung open and Jessica breezed in, scrolling on her phone. Sorry, parking was a nightmare, she said, not looking up. Is she done faking her mysterious illness so we can go? Dr. Evans stiffened. Jessica, your mother has a serious medical condition. She finally looked up, her eyes narrowing. He began to explain, pointing to the lesions, using words like demyelination and cognitive impact. I watched my daughter's face morph from impatience to disbelief, then to outright hostility. Before the doctor could finish, she strode forward and snatched the diagnostic papers from his hand. Her eyes scanned the page, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows knitting together in a frown of pure rage. This is a joke, she spat out. What is this? A new way to bleed me dry? How much did you pay him to fake this? She whirled on me, her face a mask of contempt. You've always been a drama queen, always needing to be the center of attention. Even after Dad died, it was always poor me, poor Leah. Each word was a stone, and she was building a wall between us with them. I had been a surgical nurse for 40 years. I'd seen real pain, real suffering. I was the last person to feign illness. I tried to find my voice to defend myself, but it was lost in the cavern of her anger. Dr. Evans stepped between us. Mrs. Vance, this is a legitimate diagnosis from one of the best neurologists in the state. Your mother needs medication and ongoing care. This isn't a choice. Jessica just laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed in the small room. Oh, I'm sure it is. And I'm sure it comes with a hefty price tag that you'd be more than happy to help us manage. She crumpled the papers in her fist, turning her back on the doctor, on the truth lit up on the wall. We're leaving. The car ride home was a silent, suffocating ordeal. I stared out the window at the passing blur of trees and houses, my own reflection a ghostly image superimposed over the world outside. I looked old, frightened, invisible. Jessica gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. She was radiating a furious energy that seemed to suck all the air out of the car. When we got home, I followed her into the kitchen, a tiny foolish flicker of hope still alive in me. Maybe she would calm down. Maybe she would listen. Maybe the daughter I knew was still in there somewhere. She walked straight to the trash can, the one tucked under the sink. With a flick of her wrist, she tossed the crumpled ball of paper, my diagnosis, my future, my last shred of hope for help, into the bin. It landed with a soft thud on top of last night's KFC bones and greasy napkins. She didn't even look at me. She just turned, pulled a bottle of sparkling water from the fridge, and acted as if I didn't exist. Later that night, the house was quiet. I couldn't sleep. The vice was back, a dull ache in my chest that was more fear than pain. I crept out of my room and saw the glow of the family iPad on the living room coffee table. Picked it up. Her Facebook page was open. And there it was. A new post from an hour ago. A beautifully filtered selfie of her, looking tired but noble. The caption read, "Being a caregiver is so hard, especially when you're not sure what's real and what's a performance. Mom's trying a new tactic for attention, and it's a medical one this time. It's so exhausting dealing with this kind of manipulation. Sending love to all my fellow caregivers out there who get it. Elderly narcissist caregiver burnout family drama." I sank into the armchair, the cold leather a shock against my skin. The comments were already pouring in. "You're a saint, Jess. Stay strong." My mother-in-law does the exact same thing. She hadn't just thrown away my diagnosis. She had taken my reality, twisted it into a lie, and broadcast it to the world for sympathy and likes. I was no longer Leah Vance, wife, mother, nurse. I was an elderly narcissist. A burden. A lie. And in the cold blue glow of the screen, I felt the last of my old life crumble into dust. The fight wasn't just against the disease in my brain anymore. It was against the daughter who wished I would just disappear. My name is Leah Vance. For 40 years my hands were my gift. They were steady and sure, instruments of precision in the hushed, sterile theater of an operating room. As a surgical nurse, I've held retractors steady for hours, my gaze fixed on the delicate dance of life and death within an open chest cavity. I've passed scalpels with a silent understanding that passed between surgeon and nurse, a language spoken in the subtle shift of weight, the slight tilt of a head. I knew the rhythm of a healthy heart on a monitor, the low hum of the machines that breathed for the people who could not. I was a part of a team that mended the broken, that fought back the darkness. I was competent. I was needed. My existence had a clear and vital purpose. Then there was my life with David. My David. He was a quiet man. A real estate developer who saw potential where others saw only dilapidation and dust. He didn't speak in grand romantic declarations. His love was built brick by brick in the stability he provided, in the way he'd look up from his newspaper in the morning, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips as I bustled around the kitchen. He was shrewd, yes, but I saw it as a form of protection for us, for our family. Our home, the one he designed himself, was a sanctuary of warm wood, sunlit rooms, and the lingering scent of his pipe tobacco. It was a house that held the echoes of our daughter Jessica's first steps, the triumphant shouts from her high school graduation party, the quiet tears we shed together when she left for college. I thought I knew him completely, every quiet strength, every hidden worry. I thought our life was a fortress impenetrable. Then suddenly it wasn't. His death was like a switch being flipped, plunging my world into a sudden disorienting darkness. One moment he was there, complaining about the property taxes, and the next he was gone. The fortress crumbled. The silence in that big house became a physical weight, pressing down on me. Every room held a ghost. Every chair expected him to return. Selling it felt like a betrayal, like packing away the very soul of our life together in cardboard boxes. But Jessica, my daughter, my only child, had a plan. She and her husband, Mark, had found their dream house. A perfect suburban palace with a 2-car garage, a sprawling green lawn, and a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a magazine. All it needed, she'd said, her voice full of breathless excitement, was a substantial down payment. My heart, still aching with the loss of David, swelled with a different purpose. I could do this for her. I could take the legacy David and I had built and planted in new soil, watch it grow into a future for my daughter and my grandson Leo. So I sold our home, the repository of my happiest memories. I took the majority of the proceeds, a sum that made my own hands tremble, and wrote a check to Jessica. I remember the look on her face, a flash of triumph so bright it almost looked like greed. But I told myself it was joy. I was her mother. It was my job to see the best in her. I moved into their guest room, a small tidy space at the back of the house. I brought only a few things: my photo albums, David's favorite armchair, and a heart full of hope. We would take care of each other, I believed. A new chapter. A blending of families. I would bake cookies for Leo, help Jessica in the garden, and we would fill this big new house with the same warmth I had known my whole life. I was 72 years old, a woman who had faced down death in the operating room. A woman who had built a life of love and purpose. And in that moment, believing in the goodness of my own child, I was an utter and complete fool. My world, once as expansive as a life well lived, has now shrunk to the 4 walls of this room. The scent of antiseptic and the quiet hum of life-saving machinery have been replaced by the faint, cloying smell of air freshener and the distant, muffled sounds of a life I am no longer a part of. My existence has been compressed, edited down to a footnote in the story of this house. I eat after they have finished. I've learned to listen for the scrape of chairs, the clatter of silverware being dropped into the sink. Only then, when the dining room is empty and the murmur of their conversation has moved to the living room, do I venture out. My dinner is what remains on their serving platters. A spoonful of cold mashed potatoes, a few stray green beans, the dry end piece of a meatloaf. I eat standing over the counter quickly, as if I am a thief stealing scraps. Some nights there is nothing left at all. On those nights I drink a glass of water and tell myself I wasn't hungry anyway. My grandson Leo is 16. I see him in flashes, a tall, lanky shape moving through the hallways. He wears a virtual reality headset most of the time, his hands gesturing at enemies only he can see. He doesn't seem to register my physical presence. I am a glitch in his periphery, a piece of the landscape to be navigated around. The other day I stood in the hall determined to connect. "Leo," I said, my voice sounding thin and unused. "How was school today?" He walked straight towards me, his eyes hidden behind the glowing visor, focused on a world a million miles away. At the last second he sidestepped, his shoulder barely grazing mine, and continued down the hall, his disembodied voice shouting, "Headshot! Got him!" He walked through me as if I were a hologram, a ghost in his own home. I am his grandmother. And I am nothing. Mark, my son-in-law, is a man who loves technology. He has made this a smart home. The lights, the security system, the thermostat, it's all controlled by his phone. It's a cage of convenience, and I am the one locked inside. The thermostat is set to 65 degrees. Always. Even as the autumn air chills the house and my old bones ache with a deep, persistent cold, the temperature remains unchanged. I have a thin blanket on my bed. I shiver through most nights. Warmth is a luxury I am not afforded. It is a privilege, and I, it seems, have no privileges here. The Wi-Fi password is my tether to the outside world, to the woman I used to be. It's how I read the news, how I see pictures of my old colleagues from the hospital, how I could, if I dared, email a friend. But the password changes. Not on a schedule, but at Mark's whim. One day I am connected, and the next, the little icon on my old tablet shows an exclamation point of failure. It's a silent, effective form of solitary confinement. It leaves me alone with my thoughts, trapped in this shrinking room, with only the memory of a world that no longer includes me. They don't speak to me. Not anymore. They speak about me. The cruelty of it is breathtaking in its simplicity. I will be sitting in David's armchair, the one piece of my old life I insisted on keeping, placed in a corner of their cavernous living room. I sit there quiet, trying to take up as little space as possible, and they will talk as if I am deaf and blind. "She's just sitting there again," Jessica will say, not even bothering to lower her voice. Her tone isn't one of concern. It's one of profound annoyance, as if I am a stain on her perfect beige carpet. Mark will look up from his laptop, his eyes flicking over to me for a second before dismissing me entirely. "It's what she does. Just sits. Do you think she can even hear us?" "Who knows?" Jessica will sigh, a long theatrical exhalation of a daughter burdened. "Probably not. The doctor said her mind was starting to go. It's a blessing, really. She's probably happier in her own little world. Every word is a stone. Every sentence is a small, sharp cut. I hear them. I hear it all. I am not in my own little world. I am in theirs. And in their world, I am a problem to be managed, an object to be discussed. I am a piece of furniture that occasionally coughs, a faint, rattling sound that for a fleeting moment reminds them that I am still, inconveniently, alive. The abuse wasn't a single cataclysmic event. It was death by 1,000 cuts, each one so small you could almost convince yourself it hadn't happened. But they did happen. Every day. The first cut of the morning was the cold. It was a deep, invasive cold that settled in my joints and refused to leave. I'd wake up shivering, my breath a pale cloud in the air of my small room, and my first conscious thought would be about the heated blanket David had bought me years ago. "For your old bones," he'd said, his eyes crinkling with a love that felt like a phantom limb now. I'd reach for the controller, my fingers fumbling with the tremors that had become my constant companions, only to find the little red light was off. Again. I didn't need to look to know why. Mark made a show of it every evening, a little ritual of cruelty disguised as fiscal responsibility. He'd walk into my room without knocking, his eyes scanning for any perceived waste. He'd point to the blanket's cord. "Leah, we've talked about this. The electricity bills are through the roof. You've got plenty of regular blankets. Just bundle up." He'd say it with a patient, condescending tone, as if explaining a complex concept to a child. Then he'd bend down, a grunt of effort escaping his lips, and pull the plug from the wall with a decisive tug. The little red light would die, and a part of my warmth for the night would die with it. He wasn't saving a few dollars. He was reminding me that my comfort was an expensive, unnecessary luxury. He was reminding me who held the power. The next cut was usually the pharmacy. My heart medication was a lifeline. The tiny pills a barrier between a manageable condition and a cascade of frightening symptoms. But the bottle was empty. Again. I had reminded Jessica 3 days ago. I'd written it on the grocery list she kept on the fridge, my handwriting shaky but clear. Leah's heart meds. Yesterday, I'd asked her again, my voice small, hating the pleading tone it took on. "Oh, Mom, for goodness sake, I've got it," she'd snapped, not even looking up from her phone, her thumb swiping furiously. "I'm not your personal assistant. I have a life." This morning I found her in the kitchen, blending a vibrant green smoothie. The noise of the machine filled the space, a violent, churning sound that matched the anxiety in my chest. I waited for it to stop. "Jessica, dear," I began, holding up the empty orange bottle. "My pills." She sighed, a long theatrical exhalation of pure annoyance. She poured the green sludge into a tall glass. "Mom, I was at the store yesterday. Completely slipped my mind. I had to get stuff for Leo's project, and then I had a work call and Mark needed his protein powder. It was chaos. But I'm completely out," I said, the words feeling thin and useless. "The doctor said it's very important I don't miss a dose." She took a long sip of her smoothie, her eyes cold over the rim of the glass. "You'll be fine for one more day. Honestly, the way you catastrophize everything, it's probably half in your head anyway. I'll try to remember tomorrow." She wouldn't. I knew she wouldn't. This was the 5th time in 3 months. Forgetting was a weapon. It was a way of saying, your health, your life is less important than my convenience. It is an item on a to-do list that I can choose to ignore. So I would spend the day with a flutter in my chest that wasn't just nerves, feeling the phantom pains and the dizziness, wondering if this was the day her forgetfulness would have a real, permanent consequence. Mealtimes were another series of cuts. The family ate at the large oak dining table David and I had bought for our first home. I used to sit at the head of it. Now I wasn't allowed at the table at all. "It's just too crowded, Mom," Jessica had explained one day, a few months after I moved in, "and Leo needs the space to do his homework." So my place was at the small kitchen counter on a wobbly stool facing the wall. They'd eat roast chicken, the smell filling the house, their laughter echoing from the other room. My meal would be brought to me later on a plastic plate, the kind you use for toddlers. It would be the leftovers. A dry chicken wing, a spoonful of cold, congealed mashed potatoes. Sometimes, if they had pizza, I'd get the crusts Leo had left on his plate. I ate what they discarded. I was no longer family. I was the dog they fed scraps to under the table, except I wasn't even allowed under the table. I was banished to the periphery. I'd listen to them talk about their day, about their friends, about their plans. Mark would talk about a deal at work. Jessica would complain about a colleague. Leo would talk about a video game. Their lives hummed along. A self-contained unit of which I was no longer a part. I was just a ghost in their kitchen. A weird smell from the old lady's room. That cut came during one of their parties. They hosted them, often loud, boisterous affairs with people I didn't know. I was expected to stay in my room, the door closed. "Our friends just want to relax, Mom. They don't want to have to make small talk with an old person." The bass from the music would throb through the floorboards, a relentless, alien heartbeat. On this particular night, the laughter was especially loud. My door was thin. I couldn't help but overhear. A woman with a shrill, piercing laugh was standing right outside. "Jess, what is that smell?" the woman asked, her voice dripping with disdain. "It's like mothballs and regret." More laughter. Then Jessica's voice, light and airy, as if sharing a funny little secret. "Oh, that's just Mom's room. You know how old people get. I swear I air it out every day, but the smell just clings." Mothballs and regret. The word sliced into me. I pulled my thin blanket up to my nose, inhaling deeply. Did I smell? I showered. I was clean. But her words planted a seed of doubt, of shame. They had reduced my entire existence, my history, my very being, to an unpleasant odor they had to endure. The constant stress, the poor nutrition, the missed medications, they took their toll. My body began to betray me in new and frightening ways. The tremors in my hands grew so violent that holding a fork was a challenge. Spilling soup became a common humiliation, always met with a sharp sigh from Jessica and a muttered "for Christ's sake" from Mark. Then came the falls. The first time, my leg simply gave out as I was walking from the living room. I landed hard on the plush carpet, the air knocked out of my lungs. They were both there, watching television. They turned, looked at me on the floor, and then looked at each other. Mark just shook his head and turned back to the screen. Jessica watched me for a moment longer before saying, "Well, are you going to get up, or are you just going to lie there?" I learned to get up on my own. But the last time was different. I was heading to the bathroom in the middle of the night, my body stiff and aching from the cold. A wave of dizziness, black and sudden, washed over me. The hallway tilted. My hip struck the corner of the wall with a sickening crack, and I crumpled to the hardwood floor. The pain was sharp, electric. I cried out, a sound that was swallowed by the silent house. I tried to push myself up, but a fiery agony shot through my side. I couldn't move. I lay there, helpless, the polished wood cold against my cheek. I heard a door open. Footsteps. It was Jessica, followed by Mark. They stood over me, two tall silhouettes against the dim hallway light. I looked up, expecting. I don't know what I expected. Annoyance, maybe, but not the cold, clinical detachment in their eyes. "What is it now?" Jessica asked, her voice thick with sleep and irritation. I think I broke something," I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. "My hip." Mark scoffed. "Oh, here we go. Another bit for attention." They didn't move to help me. They just stood there, looking down at me as if I were a piece of furniture that had toppled over. Then I saw the glint of Jessica's phone. She raised it, the screen casting an eerie blue light on her face. She framed the shot, her expression one of mild amusement, and I saw a small white flash. Click. She stared at the screen, a small smile playing on her lips. "Perfect," she murmured to Mark. "Look at this. The caption's gonna be Monday mood. My friends will think this is hilarious." They stepped over me, carefully so as not to touch me. They went into their bedroom and closed the door. I was left alone in the dark hallway, the pain in my hip a roaring fire. The image of that camera flash burned onto my retinas. I wasn't a mother in pain. I wasn't a human being in need of help. I was a prop, a meme, a punchline. It was in that moment, lying on the cold floor, that I understood the finality of my erasure. The fall became their excuse for the final descent. A few days later, after I had managed to drag myself back to my room, my body a constellation of deep purple bruises, they came to me together. They stood in the doorway, their expressions a carefully rehearsed pantomime of concern. It was Jessica who spoke. "Mom," she began, her voice syrupy sweet. "Mark and I have been talking, and we're worried about you." Mark nodded gravely. "That fall the other night. You could have really hurt yourself. It's not safe for you to be up here so far from us, where we can't keep an eye on you." I stared at them, my heart a cold stone in my chest. Keep an eye on me? I wanted to scream. You stepped over me. But the words wouldn't come. My voice had been stolen long ago. "Mark needs a space for his new home gym," Jessica continued, her tone becoming more practical, the fake concern evaporating. "He got a Peloton, and there's just no room for it anywhere else. So we're going to turn this room into the gym." I looked around at the four walls that had been my sanctuary, however meager. The photographs of David. The small bookshelf with my favorite novels. My world. Where will I go?" I asked, the question a hoarse whisper. Jessica smiled, a bright, chillingly cheerful smile. "You'll be more comfortable in the basement, Mom. It's cozy. And it's right downstairs, so you won't have to worry about falling down the stairs anymore. It's for the best." It was not a discussion. It was a decree. The next day, Mark began moving my things. He didn't pack them in boxes. He carried them down, armload by armload, with the careless air of a man clearing out junk. My antique reading lamp clanged against the narrow concrete steps. The box of David's letters, my most precious possession, was tossed onto the floor with a dusty thud. I followed them down, each step into the gloom a step further away from the light, from life itself. The basement was a concrete box. The air was thick and heavy with the smell of damp earth, mildew, and something else. Something like decay. It was cold. A deep, penetrating cold that the single bare bulb hanging from a wire in the ceiling did nothing to warm. The light was harsh and yellow, casting long monstrous shadows that danced on the stained concrete walls. High on one wall was a single tiny window, caked with dirt and cobwebs. It looked out onto the bottom of a rosebush, offering a view of nothing but thorny stems and dirt. They set up my bed in the corner, the metal frame looking flimsy and pathetic against the massive, sweating furnace that dominated the space. Next to the bed, they placed a 5-gallon plastic bucket. "What's that for?" I asked, though I already knew. "It's for the toilet," Jessica said matter-of-factly. "The stairs are just too dangerous for you to be going up and down at night. This is much safer." Safer. The word was a parody. My world, which had already shrunk to a single room, was now reduced to these 4 damp walls, a sagging mattress, and a bucket. My dignity was gone. My humanity was gone. All that was left was this breathing shell. That first night was the longest of my life. The furnace would kick on with a terrifying roar, shaking the whole basement, then fall silent, leaving an oppressive quiet broken only by the drip, drip, drip of water somewhere in the darkness. I lay in bed, fully clothed, shivering under my one thin blanket, and listened to the sounds of my family living their life above me. I heard the murmur of the television, the sound of their laughter, the footsteps of my grandson Leo, running across the floor above my head. They were so close, yet they were a world away. Around 10 o'clock I heard footsteps on the stairs. It was Jessica. She didn't come in. She just stood at the top. "Good night, Mom." Her voice echoed in the cavernous space. "Sleep tight." And then I heard it. A sound that froze the very marrow in my bones. The unmistakable metallic slide of a deadbolt. The solid final click as it locked into place. I sat bolt upright, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Jessica!" I called out, my voice trembling. "Jessica, what was that?" Her voice came back, muffled through the thick wooden door. "It's for your own good, Mom. So you don't wander. We read online that old people with your condition sometimes wander off and get lost. We can't have that, can we?" Her footsteps retreated, growing fainter until they disappeared completely. I was alone. In the dark. Locked in. The single bare bulb seemed to dim, the shadows pressing in on me. I got out of bed, my feet recoiling from the icy concrete, and went to the door. I pushed against it. It was solid, unmoving. I rattled the knob. It was useless. I was a prisoner, buried alive in my daughter's basement. I sank to the floor, my back against the cold, unyielding door. And for the first time in a very, very long time I wept. Not for the humiliation or the neglect or the pain, but for the Leah who used to exist. The competent nurse, the beloved wife, the respected mother. She was gone. In her place was this creature in the dark. A nameless, faceless thing locked away in a concrete box, waiting for the end. The cuts were no longer small. This was the final severing blow. My world was now 4 damp walls, and the only sound was the dripping of water. Like a clock ticking down the last moments of my life, the silence in the basement had its own texture. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a library, but the thick, damp silence of a tomb. It pressed in on my ears, broken only by the hum of the ancient freezer in the corner, and the drip-drip-drip of a leaky pipe somewhere in the darkness. My world had shrunk to this concrete box, to the single bare bulb that cast long dancing shadows, and to the bucket in the corner that served as my only dignity. Days bled into one another, marked not by the sun, which I could only see as a pale, distant smear through the grimy window high on the wall, but by the slide of a plastic tray under the door. Leftovers. Always leftovers. Then one afternoon, a different sound pierced the muffled quiet of my existence. A firm, decisive knock on the front door upstairs. It was a sound I hadn't heard in what felt like a lifetime. It wasn't the thump of a package delivery, or the hurried tap of one of Jessica's friends. This was deliberate. Authoritative. I heard the scuff of Mark's slippers on the hardwood floor, then the creak of the door. A voice, calm and deep, carried down the stairwell. "I'm looking for Mrs. Leah Vance. My name is Alistair Finch. I was her husband's attorney." Jessica's voice, sharp and saccharine, cut through the air. "Oh, I'm afraid you've come at a bad time. Mother isn't well. She's confused." We're handling all of her affairs now. I appreciate that, Mrs. Miller. The man's voice, Finch's voice, remained steady, unruffled. However, my business is with Mrs. Vance directly. It pertains to the execution of her late husband's estate. It is a matter of some urgency. Her husband's estate was settled years ago, Mark interjected, his tone dripping with condescension. Everything went to Jessica as it should. I think you have your files mixed up, old man. I assure you I do not, Finch replied. There was a pause, a shift in the acoustic space above me. I imagined him stepping over the threshold. My instructions from Mr. David Vance were explicit and are legally binding. I must speak with his wife. Alone. The argument continued, a muffled back and forth of Jessica's rising hysteria and Finch's implacable calm. I pressed my ear to the cold wood of the basement door, my heart a frantic bird against my ribs. Finally, I heard the heavy thud of Mark's footsteps descending the stairs. The lock scraped and the door swung open, flooding my dim world with the yellow light from the hallway. Mark sneered down at me. Some fossil from Dad's past is here to see you. Don't get any bright ideas. He'll see you're a lunatic and be on his way. He left the door ajar. Slowly, painfully, I pushed myself up, my joints screaming in protest. I used the damp wall for support and made my way up the rickety wooden steps, emerging into the light like a creature from the deep. Alistair Finch was not what I expected. He was tall, thin as a rail, and wore a dark gray suit that seemed immune to wrinkles. His eyes, behind a pair of wire-rimmed glasses, were sharp and missed nothing. They took in my soiled clothes, my matted hair, the tremor in my hands, but his expression remained one of polite neutrality. Jessica hovered behind him, her arms crossed, a viperous smile plastered on her face. See? I told you. She's not capable of discussing anything. Finch ignored her. He looked directly at me. Mrs. Vance? May we speak in private? Before Jessica could protest again, he gestured toward the living room. I followed him, my every step a defiance. He waited until I had lowered myself onto the edge of a pristine white armchair, an armchair I was never allowed to sit on, before turning to my daughter. 5 minutes, Mrs. Miller. That is all I require. He closed the living room's pocket doors, shutting out Jessica's indignant gasp. He didn't sit. He stood before me, a sentinel of a world I had forgotten. He opened his briefcase and took out not a stack of papers, but a sleek, modern tablet. He powered it on, his movements efficient and precise. Leah, he said, and the use of my first name was a small shock, a reminder that I was a person. I'm going to be direct, as David always insisted. He knew his daughter. He feared this. His gaze swept around the immaculate, soulless room. So he made preparations. He handed me the tablet. The screen glowed with a single complex legal document. David set up a very particular trust, Leah. He established it the year before he passed. Controls everything. The house you are in, the cars in the driveway, the bank accounts Mark and Jessica use. Everything. He called it the legacy proving. It has a morality clause. A very specific, very stringent morality clause tied to your well-being. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a near whisper. And I am its sole executor. My only duty is to David's instructions and to you. It's time to activate it. I stared at the screen, the words swimming before my eyes. Legacy proving. Morality clause. Executor. They were just words, but they felt like stones being dropped into the stagnant pool of my life, the ripples spreading outwards, threatening to become a tidal wave. For the first time in years, a flicker of something other than despair ignited in my chest. Felt like fire. Felt like hope. When Finch left, he placed his business card on the small table by the door. Call me on this number. It is my private line. Memorize it if you can. I didn't get the chance. The moment the front door clicked shut, Jessica snatched it up. Her eyes scanned the elegant script. Alistair Finch, Esquire. Estate law. Her face went pale under her makeup. She looked from the card to me, and for the first time, I saw not contempt in her eyes, but pure, unadulterated fear. That night, The tray of food that slid under my door was not leftovers. It was a proper meal on a real plate. It was a gesture of panic. The reprieve was short-lived. The silence from upstairs for the next day or so was heavier, more menacing than before. I could hear frantic, whispered conversations. The sharp, staccato typing of Mark on his keyboard late into the night. They were digging. They were planning. And then it came. Not a tray of food, but a crisp, official-looking envelope slipped under the door. My name was on it, typed in cold block letters. My hand shook so badly I could barely tear it open. It was a petition to the court. An application for emergency guardianship. The words leapt off the page, each one a slap in the face. Senile dementia, cognitively impaired, a danger to herself and her finances, susceptible to manipulation by outside parties. It was signed by Dr. Melinda Strauss, a physician I had never met, supported by a sworn affidavit from my daughter, Jessica Miller. They were trying to have me legally erased. Declared a non-person. A ward of the very people who had locked me in a cage. A court date was set. It was in 2 weeks. My own daughter, my only child, was taking me to court to prove I no longer existed in any meaningful way. The hope Finch had ignited sputtered, threatening to be extinguished by a flood of legal jargon and lies. I spent an entire day just staring at those papers, the cold dread seeping back into my bones, chilling me more than the damp concrete floor. I had memorized Finch's number, repeating it to myself like a prayer. But how could I call? The phone was upstairs. My access to the world was controlled by the very people trying to declare me incompetent. The obstacle wasn't just the legal petition, it was these 4 walls. The next morning, the lock on the basement door clicked open earlier than usual. It was Jessica. She didn't look at me. "You have a nurse coming today," she said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Your new lawyer friend arranged it. To assess you for the hearing." She tossed a bundle of clean clothes onto the floor. "Try to look presentable. We don't want them thinking we don't take care of you." The irony was so thick it was suffocating. A few hours later, a woman came down the stairs. She was younger than I expected, perhaps in her late 30s, with dark, kind eyes and a strength in her posture that was immediately reassuring. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her uniform was spotless. "Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice gentle. "My name is Sophia. I'm from the agency Mr. Finch contracted. I'm here to help you." She didn't treat me like a specimen or a problem. She helped me to a chair, checked my blood pressure, and looked at the sores on my ankles from the damp. She didn't recoil. She simply made a note on her chart, her expression a mixture of professionalism and compassion. "We need to get some antibiotic cream on these," she said, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Over the next few days, Sophia became my lifeline. She came every morning and stayed until evening. She brought a small electric kettle and made me tea. She helped me wash my hair in a plastic basin. We didn't talk much about the case at first. We talked about the garden I used to have, about the books I loved to read. She would listen, really listen, her dark eyes filled with an empathy I had forgotten existed. She was the first person in years who had looked at me and seen Leah Vance, the former surgical nurse, the widow, the mother, instead of a piece of unwanted, decaying furniture. I found myself trusting her implicitly. She was a window to the world I had lost, a breath of fresh air in my subterranean prison. She became my confidant, the keeper of my rekindled hope. Mark, however, watched her like a hawk. He had installed a new security camera at the top of the basement stairs, its little red light a constant, malevolent eye. He would often appear when Sophia was with me, asking pointed questions disguised as casual conversation. "Where are you from, Sophia? Big family? You must work hard to support them." The blow fell on a Thursday. I was feeling stronger than I had in months. Sophia had been helping me with small exercises, and the fog of malnutrition and despair was slowly beginning to lift. I was sitting on the edge of my cot, and Sophia was reading a passage from an old poetry book she'd brought, when Jessica and Mark stormed down the stairs. Jessica's face was a mask of triumphant rage. She was waving a piece of paper, a printout from a computer. "I knew it," she spat, shoving the paper in my face. I knew there was something wrong with her. She jabbed a finger at Sophia, who had risen to her feet, placing herself slightly in front of me. Your brother, Jessica hissed at her. Marco Rossi. Does that name ring a bell? Arrested 3 times for felony fraud. Targeting the elderly. It's a family business, isn't it? She turned her venom on me. She's a grifter, Mom. A professional con artist. Finch sent her in here to get close to you to manipulate you. They're all in on it together, trying to get their hands on your money. Can't you see? She's just like her family. I looked at the paper. It was a mugshot. A young man who had Sophia's eyes. Then I looked at Sophia. Her face was pale, her expression unreadable. She didn't deny it. She couldn't. Jessica, that has nothing to do with my work, Sophia said, her voice low but steady. My brother and I have been estranged for years. His choices are not mine. Oh, save it. Mark scoffed. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. You probably learned all your tricks from him. How to cozy up to a confused old woman and bleed her dry. They stood there, a united front of accusation and poison. And in that moment, watching Sophia's guarded face, a terrible cold sliver of doubt slid into my heart. Jessica's words were a venom tailored perfectly to my deepest fears. I was old. I was weak. I was isolated. What if they were right? What if Finch wasn't a savior but a predator? What if Sophia's kindness was just a well-rehearsed performance? The loneliness that had been my constant companion for years made me desperately vulnerable. It whispered that I was a fool to trust anyone, that this was just another more sophisticated form of cruelty. For a moment, a gut-wrenching moment, I wavered. The fragile fortress of hope I had started to build began to crumble. The next day, Sophia arrived as usual. The air between us was thick with unspoken words. She went about her duties with the same quiet efficiency, but I couldn't meet her eyes. The poison had taken root. Jessica's words echoed in my head. She's after your money. My money. The money I had given Jessica, the money that had bought this very house. The irony was a bitter pill. That afternoon, Alistair Finch came again. This time he didn't knock. Jessica let him in, a smug look on her face, clearly expecting him to be confronted with my newfound distrust. He must have seen the doubt on my face, the way I flinched when Sophia came near. He didn't address the accusations. He simply said, Leah, I have something for you. From David. He handed me a single old-fashioned brass key. There's a safe deposit box at the downtown branch of Merchants Bank. Box 317. It's registered in your name. David arranged it before he died. I think you'll find what's inside illuminating. He left as quietly as he came. Jessica watched the whole exchange with narrowed eyes, her suspicion warring with her greed. A safe deposit box? What could be in it? Jewelry? Bonds? Finch arranged for Sophia to drive me to the bank the next morning. The trip was silent and tense. Being outside in a car watching the world speed by felt surreal. The bank was a temple of marble and hushed whispers. A clerk led us into a vault, the massive steel door swinging open with a satisfying thud. He used his key, I used mine, and he slid out a long, narrow metal box. He placed it on a table in a small, private viewing room and left us alone. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. I half expected to find stacks of cash, or perhaps love letters from a secret affair, something to explain the distance that had grown between David and me in his final years. The truth was worse. So much worse. Inside there was only one item. A thick, leather-bound journal. David's journal. His precise, architectural handwriting filled every page. I opened it to the first entry, dated 2 years before he died. October 14th. Jessica visited today. She didn't ask how my doctor's appointment went. She asked what the quarterly returns were on the portfolio. She looked at the new painting over the fireplace not as something beautiful, but as an asset. I see her looking at me, at Leah, the same way. We are assets. Assets with an expiration date. I flipped through the pages, my breath catching in my throat. It was all there. A cold, meticulous chronicle of his daughter's chilling lack of empathy. December 22nd. I told Jessica the story about Mrs. Gable next door, how her son hasn't visited in a year. I was testing her. I wanted to see a flicker of sympathy. Instead, she said, "Well, the old woman should have made herself more useful." She said it without a trace of malice. It was just a simple statement of fact to her. Usefulness is the only currency she understands. He wrote about his fear, his growing certainty that Jessica's greed was a bottomless pit. And then came the part that made the blood freeze in my veins. March 5th. Met with Alastair Finch today to finalize the legacy proving. It's a monstrous gamble, I know. I am wagering my wife's final years on the slim hope that our daughter has a single shred of decency buried within her. I am leaving Leah in her care with everything, the house, the accounts, the illusion of control, as bait. The terms are simple. If she cares for her mother with kindness and dignity, she inherits it all. If she fails, if she is who I fear she is, then the morality clause is triggered and she gets nothing. Alastair will execute my will. It's a cruel test. Perhaps the cruelest thing I have ever done. But it is the only way to know. And the only way to protect Leah in the end. I slammed the journal shut. A wave of fury so potent it made me dizzy washed over me. This wasn't just about Jessica's cruelty. This was about David's. My husband, the man I had loved and nursed through his final illness, had used me. He had used my life, my safety, my happiness, as a pawn in a posthumous game to prove a point about our daughter. He saw the darkness in her and instead of confronting it, instead of protecting me, he set up a test. He gambled my final years. I felt utterly betrayed, not just by the child who had tormented me, but by the husband who had sacrificed me on the altar of his own judgment. I was nothing but a variable in an equation he had written. Sophia had been standing silently by the door. She must have seen the look on my face. She stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Leah? Are you all right?" I couldn't speak. I just pushed the journal across the table toward her. Her eyes scanned the page I had left open. She read it, then read it again. When she looked up, her expression was no longer just compassionate. It was fierce. The doubt I had felt about her evaporated, burned away by the heat of my rage and the sudden, certain knowledge that she was the only true ally I had. As we drove back from the bank, the city lights blurring past the window, a different memory began to surface, nudged from the dark recesses of my mind by a passage I'd read in David's journal. He had written about a night when Jessica was 17, how she had come home long past curfew, smelling of alcohol, with a long scratch down the side of her car. He'd written, "She looked me in the eye and swore she hit a deer." I knew she was lying. There was a look in her eyes, a hardness. I let it go. I see now that was the beginning of the end. His words unlocked a door in my mind, a door I had nailed shut and painted over for decades. It wasn't a deer. I knew it wasn't a deer. The memory came back not as a single story, but in sharp, painful fragments. The panicked phone call in the middle of the night. Jessica, hysterical, not with remorse but with fear of being caught. "Mom, you have to help me. I hit something. A guy on a bike. I drove away." I didn't stop. The sound of shattered glass crunching under my feet in our garage as I inspected the damage to her car. The broken headlight, the dent in the fender. I remembered the secret meetings. The private investigator I hired, not to find the culprit, but to find the victim. A young man, a college student, with a shattered leg and a long painful recovery ahead of him. His family wasn't wealthy. They were threatening to go to the police to press charges. I saw myself in our study, my hands shaking as I took out my entire life savings from a shoebox in the closet. Every extra shift I'd ever worked as a nurse, every bonus, every dollar I had put away for our future. I met the family in a sterile lawyer's office downtown. I didn't tell David the full story. I told him it was an investment that went bad. I put a cashier's check on the table, a sum large enough to buy their silence, to pay for their son's medical bills and his college tuition twice over. I made the problem disappear. At the time, I told myself I was protecting her future, her chance to go to college, her life. But reading David's journal, I saw it with horrifying clarity. I hadn't protected her. I had enabled her. In that moment, I taught my 17-year-old daughter the most dangerous lesson of all. That consequences are for other people. That money can erase any sin. That her actions had no weight, no price she would ever have to pay herself. I had laid the foundation for the monster she would become. The woman who could look at her ailing mother on the floor and see not a person in pain, but an inconvenience. The woman who could lock that same mother in a basement without a second thought. The realization settled in my soul like a shroud. This fight was no longer just about getting out of the basement. It wasn't just about reclaiming my dignity or fighting for my inheritance. It was about atonement. It was about confronting the sin I had buried, the sin I had committed not out of malice, but out of a mother's misguided love. The battle ahead wasn't just against Jessica and Mark. It was against the ghost of my own terrible mistake. The anger I felt towards David had been a roaring fire. Now it was something colder, something more useful. It was the precise, chilling focus of a surgeon's scalpel. He had used my life as the final, cruel variable in his equation to prove Jessica's soullessness. He had been right, of course, but the cost of his victory was my dignity. Very well. If my life was the stage for this drama he'd written, I would no longer be a passive character. I would direct the final act. They had cast me as a frail, confused old woman, a prop in the background of their vibrant, important lives. And so I embraced the role. I became the part. My movements grew more uncertain, my hands developing a tremor that I could summon and dismiss at will. I began to misplace things, my reading glasses, a hairbrush, the remote control. I'd wander into a room and stand there, blinking, as if I'd forgotten why I came. "Mom, what are you doing in here?" Jessica would ask, her voice a razor blade wrapped in cheap velvet. "The living room is that way. You remember the living room, right?" I'd look at her, my eyes wide and cloudy with feigned confusion. "Oh, yes, dear. I thought I heard a bird." Mark would snort from behind his laptop. "It's 10 o'clock at night, Leah. The birds are sleeping. You should be too." My performance was a masterpiece of subtlety. I never overplayed it. I just leaned into their perception of me, amplifying the caricature they'd already created in their minds. They wanted a senile mother? I would give them a ghost, a shuffling, mumbling specter who was so far gone she couldn't possibly be a threat. Their contempt was my camouflage. Their arrogance was my shield. A few days after my meeting with Mr. Finch, I put the first part of my own plan into motion. Jessica was in the kitchen, filming one of her candid Instagram stories, talking about the struggles of being in the sandwich generation, caring for both a teenager and an aging parent. I shuffled into the room holding my old, simple smartphone, the one they insisted I keep because a newer one would just confuse me. I held it up, squinting. "Jessica, dear, I can't seem to make it call Helen. My fingers are all thumbs today." She rolled her eyes, a grand theatrical gesture for her audience. "Oh, for goodness sake, Mom. Here." She snatched the phone from my hand, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against the plastic. "You just press the green button. See? Green for go." As she was tapping at the screen, I let my hand tremble and bump against hers just enough. My thumb brushed the side of the phone, and I felt the faint vibration as the video recording app, which I had painstakingly moved to the home screen, activated. I'd practiced the movement 100 times in the dark of the basement, a silent drill of muscle memory. "There," she said, thrusting the phone back at me. "It's calling. Now please go downstairs. I'm busy." I took the phone, making a show of fumbling with it. "Oh dear. It seems to have gone dark." I pressed the screen again, a look of befuddlement on my face. I'll just leave it here on the counter while I fetch my glasses. Maybe I can see the buttons better then." I placed the phone face down on the granite countertop, its tiny lens pointing directly towards the living room entryway, and shuffled out of the kitchen as slowly as I could. I didn't go to the basement. I went to the small bathroom at the end of the hall and pressed my ear to the door, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I heard Mark's voice join Jessica's. The show for Instagram was over. The real performance was about to begin. "Is she gone?" he asked, his voice low. "Finally," Jessica sighed. "God, It's like having a toddler who constantly needs something. A senile, incontinent toddler. Did you see the look on her face? Blank. Completely empty. Finch is wasting his time. And our money. The competency hearing can't come soon enough, Mark agreed. My lawyer says it's a slam dunk. We've got her social media posts. The doctor's visit she faked will paint a picture of a manipulative old woman losing her mind, trying to swindle her loving family. Loving family, Jessica scoffed, but there was a smirk in her voice. Don't forget to mention how we graciously took her in. How we provide for her every need. We should probably buy a new throw blanket for that cot in the basement. Something cheap from Walmart. We can show the receipt in court. See, Your Honor? We even provide for her comfort. They both laughed. It was a dry, ugly sound like stones grinding together. What about that nurse Finch hired? Mark said, the humor gone from his voice. That's Sophia. I told you I looked into her. Her brother's a con artist. Did 2 years for fraud. It's a classic setup, Jess. She's probably in on it with Finch, trying to get the old bat to sign everything over to them. I know, Jessica said. I've been working on it. I told Mom all about it. Planted the seed. You should have seen her face. For a second, just a second, she looked scared. She's starting to doubt Sophia. It's perfect. By the time we get to court, she'll be so confused she'll think her own shadow is trying to steal from her. We'll be seen as her saviors, protecting her from the vultures. My blood ran cold. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it. They weren't just neglectful. They were architects of psychological torture. I waited a few more minutes, listening to them discuss their plans for the money they were sure they'd inherit. A ski chalet in Aspen, a new Tesla for Mark, a mommy makeover for Jessica. Every word was a golden thread, spinning a noose they didn't even know they were tying. Finally, I shuffled back into the kitchen. Did I leave my telephone in here? I asked, my voice wavering. Jessica pointed to the counter without looking up from her own phone. It's right there, Mom. Try not to lose it again. I picked it up, my hand covering the lens, and carefully stopped the recording. I slipped it into my pocket. Evidence item number 1. It was a start. The next phase required an accomplice. Sophia was scheduled to visit the following afternoon for my wellness check. Jessica and Mark always made a point to be home for her visits, a transparent performance of concerned caregiving. They'd hover, offering her coffee, asking detailed questions about my blood pressure, all while shooting me looks of pure annoyance whenever Sophia wasn't looking. Sophia arrived precisely at 2. She was a beacon of calm professionalism. She smiled warmly at Jessica, accepted a glass of water, and then turned her full attention to me. All right, Leah. How have we been feeling today? She asked, unpacking her medical kit on the coffee table. A bit foggy, I murmured, looking down at my hands. My joints are aching. Let's take a look. While Sophia wrapped the blood pressure cuff around my arm, Jessica sat on the sofa opposite us, scrolling through her phone but listening to every word. Mark leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, the self-appointed guard. Sophia was brilliant. As she took my vitals, she maintained a running commentary of medical observations, all perfectly normal, but she also used the routine as cover. When she leaned in to check my pupils with a penlight, she whispered, so low that only I could hear, her breath warm against my ear. The package is in my bag. It's a gift. From a church group. I just blinked, a vacant expression on my face. After the checkup, Sophia packed her things. She's stable, she announced to my jailers. But she does seem a bit withdrawn. It's important to keep her mind stimulated. Puzzles, photo albums, things like that. She then reached into her large tote bag. Actually, speaking of which, a community group I volunteer with donates these to seniors. It's a digital photo frame. You can upload pictures of the family to it. It might help with her memory. She pulled out a simple black frame device. It looked completely innocuous. Jessica's eyes lit up with fake sincerity. Oh, how thoughtful. That's a wonderful idea. Thank you, Sophia. It was another prop for her stage play. Another piece of evidence of what a good daughter she was. Of course, Sophia said, handing it to me. You just plug it in and it cycles through the photos. It's already got some nice stock photos of landscapes on it. She looked at me. Maybe Leo can help you add some family pictures later, Leah. I took the frame with trembling hands, staring at the picture of a serene mountain lake on its screen. That's lovely, I whispered. After Sophia left, Mark took the frame from me. I'll set it up for you, he said, his tone condescending. Wouldn't want you to break it. He carried it down to the basement, plugged it into the single outlet near my cot, and placed it on the rickety bedside table. He glanced at it for a second, saw the picture of the lake change to a field of wildflowers and grunted. There. Don't touch it. He left, locking the door behind him. The sound of the deadbolt sliding into place was as loud as a gunshot in the silence. I waited. I sat on my cot for what felt like an eternity, my gaze fixed on the digital frame. It cycled through a dozen generic images. Sunsets, beaches, forests. Then, as my eyes started to adjust to the dim light from the single bare bulb overhead, I noticed it. In the bottom right corner of the black frame, a tiny pinprick of light, no bigger than a grain of sand, glowed a faint, almost invisible red. It was active. Sophia had explained the technology to me in a hushed phone call, a call I made from the bathroom with the fan on. The camera was military-grade, disguised as a light sensor for the frame's display. It didn't record locally. It streamed, encrypted, to a secure server managed by Alastair Finch's law firm. They could see and hear everything that happened in this room in real time. My damp, cold prison was now a witness stand. The days that followed were a grueling test of my resolve. I lived inside my role. I was weak, forgetful, and pathetic. And they, in the perceived privacy of my dungeon, shed the last vestiges of their public personas. The camera in the frame became my silent, unwavering ally, a digital eye logging every cruelty. It captured Mark coming in late one night, drunk and angry after an argument with Jessica. He stumbled over to my cot and unplugged the small electric heating pad I used for my arthritis, muttering, "Wasting electricity on this old hag." The camera recorded the darkness, but the microphone picked up my shiver of pain as the cold seeped back into my bones. Timestamped and archived. It captured Jessica bringing me my dinner, a bowl of leftover congealed spaghetti, which she placed on the floor as if I were a dog. "Don't make a mess," she'd sneered. "I'm not cleaning it up." Timestamped and archived. It captured them arguing just outside my locked door, their voices sharp and clear. "Did you get the estimate from the Meadowfields place?" Jessica asked. "Yeah," Mark replied. "Cheapest one that won't get us investigated for elder abuse. It's still $2,000 a month. We can afford it once we have control of the estate," she said. "We just need to get through this hearing. We'll tell the judge she's a danger to herself, that she wanders. That's why we have to lock the door." "Good angle," Mark said. "Poor us. Forced to take extreme measures to protect our beloved, demented mother. Every word, every neglectful act, every moment of their calculated malice was no longer just my word against theirs. It was irrefutable data, streaming silently out of the darkness and into the light of Alastair Finch's server. They thought they were burying me. In truth, they were just digging their own graves, and I was handing them the shovels. My secret lifeline was a small prepaid phone Sophia had slipped me, hidden inside a hollowed-out book titled The Joy of Gardening. I only used it late at night, huddled under my thin blanket, my voice a bare whisper, when I knew Jessica and Mark were asleep or out. My calls were always to the same number. "Finch here," Alastair's voice would say, calm and steady, a lighthouse in my storm. During one of these clandestine calls, after I'd relayed the latest outrage captured by the photo frame, there was a long pause on his end. "Leah," he said, his tone shifting, becoming more serious than I'd ever heard it. "There's something else. Something David instructed me not to reveal until you had proven your commitment to this course of action. I believe that time is now." "What is it?" I whispered, my fingers cold around the small phone. "The scale of the estate. The trust. You and Jessica have been operating under a misapprehension. David liquidated some stocks before he passed, and he told Jessica the trust was worth a few million. He let her believe that. And it's not. I could almost hear Finch shaking his head. No, Leah. It's not. David was a very quiet, very brilliant man. In the late 90s, he was an angel investor. He put $100,000 into a fledgling biotech company that was working on gene sequencing technology. He put another $50,000 into an obscure startup in California that was developing AI-driven platforms for real estate valuation. Everyone thought he was crazy. My breath hitched. I had known David was smart with money, but he'd always been so frugal, so unassuming. We'd lived a comfortable middle-class life. The biotech firm is now a global pharmaceutical giant, Leah, Finch continued, his voice even. The real estate platform is the industry standard. He never touched the principal. He just let it grow, reinvesting, diversifying. I have spent the last 6 months performing a full valuation as per his instructions. He paused. I held my breath, the damp, musty air of the basement feeling thick and heavy in my lungs. Leah, the proof of legacy trust is not worth a few $1,000,000. As of this morning's market close, its assets total just over $97 million. The number was so vast, so astronomical, that it didn't even register at first. It was like being told the distance to a star. An abstract concept, meaningless to my cold, cramped reality. 97 million. I started to laugh. It was a terrible broken sound, half sob, half cackle. I pressed my fist against my mouth to stifle it. Upstairs, my daughter and her husband were plotting and scheming, tormenting me for what they thought was a moderately comfortable inheritance. They were fighting over the crumbs from a table so vast they couldn't even comprehend its existence. But that's not all. Finch's voice cut through my hysteria, pulling me back to the cold, hard facts. This is the critical part. David structured the trust in a very particular way. He used it to purchase assets over the years, all held under the trust's name, not his own. Leah listened to me carefully. I took a shaky breath. I'm listening. The house you are in right now, he said, each word a perfectly placed stone. It does not belong to Jessica and Mark. David arranged for the trust to purchase it for them as a conditional gift. The deed is in the name of the trust. The cars they drive, the Range Rover, the BMW, were purchased with funds from a trust-held account and are titled to the trust. The very bank account Jessica uses for her Amazon sprees and her designer clothes, it is not her account. It is a discretionary sub-account of the main trust, one that I, as executor, have the power to freeze at a moment's notice. The world tilted on its axis. The air left my body in a rush. They had nothing. All of it. The beautiful home they'd filled with expensive furniture and smart devices, the cars they drove, the life they flaunted online, it was all an illusion. A long-term rental they didn't even know they were in. They weren't owners. They were tenants. And they were about to be evicted. They are living on borrowed time, Leah, Finch said, his voice grim. They have been since the day David died. And they have absolutely no idea. After the call ended, I sat in the darkness for a long time. The digital frame on my nightstand silently cycled through its pictures of a world I couldn't reach. A sun-drenched beach, a snow-capped mountain, a forest glowing with autumn leaves. For the first time I saw the profound poetic cruelty of David's plan. It wasn't just a test of Jessica's character. It was a trap of epic proportions. He had given them a kingdom but had hidden the fact that their crowns were made of paper, and their castle was built on sand. And he had given me, his wronged wife, the one thing that could bring it all crashing down, the truth. A new kind of strength, cold and clear as ice, flooded my veins. This was no longer just a fight for my own dignity. It was a reckoning. I looked at the pinprick of red light on the photo frame, my silent partner in this silent stratagem. Upstairs, the usurpers slept in a bed that wasn't theirs. In a house they didn't own, dreaming of a future they had already forfeited. And down here in the dark, the true queen was wide awake, planning her return. The performance was nearly over. The curtain was about to rise on the final act. The room was beige, a bland, inoffensive color designed to suck the emotion out of everything. But it failed. The air was thick with it, a palpable tension that clung to the dark, polished wood of the conference table. On one side, my daughter Jessica and her husband Mark. They radiated a smug confidence, dressed in what they considered their courtroom best: sharp, expensive suits that looked like costumes on them. Jessica kept patting her hair, a nervous tic she'd had since she was a girl, but her smile was pure, venomous certainty. Their lawyer, a man named Davies with a soft voice and predatory eyes, was arranging his papers with the placid air of a man who believed the game was already won. I sat on the other side, next to Alistair Finch. I wore a simple gray dress, one Sophia had helped me pick out. It was meant to make me look small, forgettable. It was part of the role I had been playing for weeks. Frail. Confused. A doddering old woman losing her grip. I kept my hands clasped in my lap, my head slightly bowed, letting my gaze drift around the room as if I were struggling to place where I was. I could feel Jessica's eyes on me, a mixture of pity and triumph. She thought this was the final formality before she gained control of everything. She had no idea. "Your Honor," Davies began, his voice a smooth, sympathetic purr. "We are here today out of profound concern. My client, Ms. Jessica Vance, and her husband, Mr. Mark Thompson, have watched with growing alarm as Jessica's mother, Mrs. Leah Vance, has succumbed to a tragic and rapid cognitive decline." He gestured toward me with a sad, sweeping motion. "This is not something they ever wanted. It is a heartbreaking necessity. Mrs. Vance has become suggestible, prone to fits of paranoia and fantasy. She has fallen. She forgets to take her vital medication. She has recently fallen under the influence of outside parties who, we fear, do not have her best interests at heart." His eyes flickered toward Finch, a clear and calculated jab. Finch remained impassive, his face a granite mask. Davies continued, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "Jessica has tried everything. She has opened her home, her heart, her life to her mother. She has attempted to manage her care with love and patience, but the situation has become untenable. Mrs. Vance requires a level of supervision that only a legal guardian can provide. For her own safety, for the preservation of the assets her late, beloved husband left for her care, we are asking the court to grant Ms. Vance emergency conservatorship over her mother's affairs." He laid out his evidence. He presented screenshots of Jessica's social media posts. The one where she called me a narcissist was framed as a desperate cry for help from a daughter at her wit's end. The photo of me on the floor after I'd fallen, the one captioned "Monday Mood," was presented as a documented incident of my physical instability. He spun a narrative of a loving daughter struggling to cope with a difficult, deteriorating mother. Mark nodded along solemnly, a perfect portrait of a concerned son-in-law. They were so convincing. I almost believed them. The judge, a stern-faced woman named Harrison, looked over at me, her expression unreadable. "Mrs. Vance, do you have anything you wish to say?" I looked up, letting my eyes seem clouded and unfocused. I opened my mouth, then closed it, as if the words wouldn't come. I gave a small, helpless shrug. Jessica let out a tiny theatrical sigh of sadness. It was a masterful performance. "Mr. Finch," the judge prompted. Finch rose slowly. He was not a large man, but he filled the space with an unshakable gravity. He adjusted his spectacles, his movements deliberate and precise. "Your Honor," he said, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the cloying sympathy Davies had created, "we do not intend to dispute the claims about my client's recent behavior. In fact, we concede that Mrs. Vance has, at times, appeared confused and frail." Jessica and Mark exchanged a look of pure victory. Davies leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing on his lips. They thought it was over. Finch let the silence hang for a moment before continuing. "However, the purpose of this hearing is to determine Ms. Jessica Vance's suitability as a guardian. And on that matter, Your Honor, I would like to present evidence." Davies sat up straighter. "Objection. This is a competency hearing for Mrs. Vance, not a trial of my client's character." "On the contrary," Finch replied, not even glancing at him, "a guardian must be of sound moral character, acting in the best interest of the ward. We intend to show that Ms. Vance and Mr. Thompson have not only failed to act in Mrs. Vance's best interest, but have actively and maliciously acted against it. With the court's permission, I'd like to play a few video and audio files. The judge looked from Finch to the smug, confident faces of Jessica and Mark, then to me, the frail old woman in gray. A flicker of interest crossed her face. Permission granted, Mr. Finch. Proceed. A technician set up a large screen at the front of the room. Jessica's smirk wavered. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The first exhibit, Finch announced, is a public live stream from Ms. Vance's Instagram account, dated 3 months ago. The screen flickered to life. And there I was on the floor of my daughter's living room, gasping for breath, my hand clutching my chest. The video was shaky, filmed from above. I could see the terror in my own eyes, the genuine, agonizing struggle for each breath. Then Jessica's voice, bubbly and mocking, filled the room. And here we have the daily drama queen performance, she narrated, her voice saccharine. Mom's decided she needs a little attention today. What do you guys think? Is it a heart attack, or is she just angling for a new prescription? Place your bets in the comments. The sound of Mark's laughter echoed from off-screen. Give her an Oscar. Seriously, she's better than Meryl Streep. On the screen, little animated hearts and laughing face emojis floated up from the bottom, sent by her followers. The judge's face was stone. Davies, the lawyer, stared at his client, his mouth slightly agape. Jessica's face had gone from a healthy pink to a blotchy red. Finch didn't stop. The next exhibit is an audio recording, captured on Mrs. Vance's personal phone, which she was, at the time, believed to have misplaced. The screen went black, but the sound was horribly clear. It was Mark and Jessica's voices, low and conspiratorial, from their kitchen. Mark's voice. This is getting ridiculous. Her doctor called again about the new medication. How long are we supposed to keep this up? Jessica's voice. Just ignore it. The longer we wait, the more her condition justifies our next step. Did you look into those places I sent you? Mark's voice. Yeah. The one upstate, Meadowbrook, is the cheapest. The reviews are terrible, but that's the point, isn't it? They have a reputation. They'll lose her in the system fastest. One big initial payment and we never have to think about it again. Jessica's voice after a pause. It feels right. It's for her own good, really. She'll be safe there. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. Jessica wasn't looking at the screen anymore. She was staring at her hands, her knuckles white. Mark looked like he'd been turned to stone. And the final exhibit, Your Honor, Finch said, his voice dropping to an almost funereal tone. Footage from a hidden camera placed inside a digital picture frame in Mrs. Vance's living quarters for the last 6 weeks. The screen lit up again. This time it showed the damp, gray walls of the basement. It showed the single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. It showed the cot I slept on, the thin, filthy blanket. It showed me, huddled in a corner, shivering, my breath misting in the cold air. The camera's timestamp was visible in the corner of the screen. It cycled through days and nights. It showed Jessica coming down the stairs, dropping a plate of scraps on the floor as if feeding an animal. It showed the heavy bolt on the outside of the door being thrown shut, plunging the room into near darkness. It showed the bucket in the corner. No one spoke. The only sound was the quiet hum of the projector. The reality of it, raw and undeniable, filled the room, suffocating the air. I watched Jessica's face. The blotchy red drained away, leaving behind a pale ashen white. She looked hollowed out, a ghost in an expensive suit. The smugness, the confidence, the certainty, all of it had been incinerated. All that was left was the ugly, naked truth. Judge Harrison took a slow, deep breath. She looked at the screen, then at Jessica and Mark, and the contempt in her eyes was a physical force. She turned to their lawyer. Mr. Davies, do you have anything to add? Davies opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at his clients with utter disgust and shook his head, slumping back into his chair, defeated. The judge's gaze settled on Jessica. Ms. Vance, I have been on this bench for 22 years. I have seen greed, I have seen cruelty, I have seen neglect. But rarely have I seen them so creatively and enthusiastically combined. She picked up her gavel. The petition for conservatorship is dismissed. With prejudice. Which means you can never, ever file such a motion regarding your mother again. This hearing is adjourned. The sharp crack of the gavel echoed in the silent room. It was over. But it wasn't. Jessica and Mark sat frozen for a moment, the verdict washing over them. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, they scrambled to their feet, their only instinct to flee the scene of their own immolation. One moment. Finch's voice cut through their panic. It wasn't loud, but it stopped them cold. They turned, their faces a mixture of confusion and fear. Finch remained seated, calmly gathering his papers. The court's business may be concluded, but ours is not. He looked directly at Jessica and Mark, his eyes as cold and hard as river stones. Please sit down. Reluctantly, like chastened children, they sank back into their chairs. Their lawyer, Davies, looked like he wanted to be anywhere else on earth. Finch slid a thick leather-bound document across the polished table. It stopped directly in front of Jessica. You may not be familiar with your late father's final testament. He was a very meticulous man. He loved your mother, but he was not blind to your character, Jessica. He established a trust. The David Vance Legacy Proving Trust. Jessica stared at the document as if it were a snake. What is that? It is the legal entity that holds all of your father's assets, Finch explained patiently. He stipulated that you were to be the beneficiary, under one very specific condition. A condition I, as the sole executor, was tasked with overseeing. He called it, in his own particular style, the morality clause. He paused, letting the words sink in. As per Section 5.1 of the Trust, your inheritance was contingent upon your providing humane and dignified care for your mother for the remainder of her natural life. It was a test, you see. A test of your character. A test you have just failed in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. He tapped the document with his finger. Your failure to meet the terms of this clause has resulted in your complete and irrevocable disinheritance. Jessica stared at him. Then she let out a laugh. It wasn't a sound of amusement. It was a high, hysterical, broken noise, the sound of a mind cracking under pressure. You're insane, she sputtered, gesturing wildly around the room. That's not possible. The house is mine. Mom gave it to me. The money for the down payment, it was a gift. Finch's expression didn't change. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out another set of papers, fanning them out on the table like a winning hand in poker. He slid them across. The house, Ms. Vance, he said, his voice flat and devoid of any emotion, was never yours. The down payment was not a gift to you. It was an investment from the trust, into an asset owned by the trust. The title deed has always been held by the David Vance Legacy Proving Trust. He pointed to another document. As does the title for your car. And the one for your husband's. He pushed a final thick stack of bank statements forward. And the funds in your primary accounts, which have been receiving a monthly stipend from the trust for the last 5 years, those also belong to the trust. He leaned back in his chair, the picture of calm. You have been living on borrowed time with borrowed money in a borrowed house. Your loan, I'm afraid, has just been called in. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. An agent of the trust will be by tomorrow to change the locks and begin an inventory of the assets contained within. The room was silent again. The weight of Finch's words crushed the remaining air out of the space. 30 days. It was a death sentence. Jessica's hysterical laughter had died in her throat, replaced by a choked, gasping sound. Mark's face was the color of old parchment. He was staring at the documents, his brain visibly struggling to process the sheer totality of their ruin. They had lost everything. The house, the cars, the money, the life they had built on a foundation of lies and cruelty. It was all gone. Jessica's head snapped up, her eyes wild and searching for someone to blame. For a life raft in the wreckage. They landed on me. And then they flickered past me to Sophia, who had been standing quietly by the door the entire time. Her presence a silent, supportive anchor for me. A new kind of venom filled Jessica's voice. A desperate final lunge. I see what this is, she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Sophia. It's her. You're giving it all to her. The nurse. The con artist. That criminal's sister. You're going to let her steal everything my father worked for. Mark nodded dumbly, grabbing onto the new narrative. Yeah. She manipulated you. That's the real crime here. A tiny, almost imperceptible smirk played on Alistair Finch's lips. It was the first crack in his professional facade, a glimpse of the satisfaction he felt. He had been waiting for this. Not quite, he said, the amusement now coloring his voice. He reached into his briefcase one last time and produced a final beautifully bound portfolio. He didn't slide this one across the table. He opened it in front of himself, as if presenting a royal charter. Leah has no intention of keeping the money for herself, Finch announced to the ruined couple. She decided quite rightly that an inheritance of this size should serve a greater purpose. A purpose that honors the spirit, if not the letter, of her late husband's final wishes. He turned the portfolio around for them to see the cover, embossed in gold leaf. The David Vance Legacy Proving Trust has been legally restructured. As of this morning, it is now the Vance Foundation for Elder Dignity. It is a multimillion-dollar nonprofit organization with a single dedicated mission: to fight, expose, and legally prosecute cases of elder abuse across the country. The words hung in the air, each one a nail in their coffin. Their cruelty hadn't just cost them a fortune. It had funded a legion that would now hunt people just like them. It was a beautiful, terrible poetry. Finch wasn't finished. He looked over at Sophia, who met his gaze with a quiet strength. A foundation of this magnitude, of course, requires a director. Someone with integrity, compassion, and first-hand experience in the field of elder care. Someone with the strength to build it from the ground up. He closed the portfolio and stood, walking over to Sophia. He extended the portfolio to her. Ms. Ramos, he said formally, on behalf of the board's new chairwoman Leah Vance, I am authorized to offer you the position of executive director of the Vance Foundation. The role comes with a generous starting salary, a full benefits package, and a housing allowance sufficient to secure a residence of your choosing. He smiled, a genuine warm smile this time. It's not an inheritance, Sophia. It's a job offer. The ultimate power move. Jessica made a noise, a low guttural sound of pure helpless rage. My daughter, my tormentor, finally understood. This wasn't just about losing money. It was about being replaced. Her role as daughter, caregiver, and heir had been stripped away and given, as a professional honor, to a woman who had shown me the kindness Jessica never could. The money wasn't a gift to a stranger. It was an investment in decency. I watched them, my daughter and her husband, completely and utterly broken. Not by shouting, not by violence, but by the quiet, methodical dismantling of their world. There was no satisfaction in their pain. Only a profound, quiet finality. The war was over. I had not sought to destroy their lives. I had only sought to reclaim my own. And in doing so, I had found a purpose for the legacy my husband had left behind. Not as a weapon of revenge, but as a shield for others. The hearing room was no longer beige. It was the color of a new dawn. The week after the world fell apart for Jessica and Mark, a new one began for me. It started with the sun. Not the sliver of weak, gray light that filtered through the grimy basement window, but a flood of it, warm and unapologetic, pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new apartment. Sophia had found the place. She had an eye for light, for spaces that allowed you to breathe. After so long in the damp, constricted darkness, I felt like a plant that had been moved into a greenhouse. I could feel my own leaves unfurling. The air smelled of fresh paint and lemon polish, not of mildew and neglect. There were no smart devices listening to my conversations, no cameras watching my every move, except for the ones in my own phone, which now felt like a tool, not a weapon turned against me. Sophia placed a steaming mug of chamomile tea on the small table beside my armchair. Her smile was gentle, without a hint of the pity I'd grown so accustomed to. It was the smile of a friend. The internet is buzzing, she said softly, her gaze flicking towards the sleek tablet resting on my lap. She didn't need to say more. I knew. Mr. Finch had warned me that the story would leak, that the court transcripts were public record. and that the fallout would be swift and loud. For days I had resisted the urge to look. I didn't want to see their faces, to hear their names. I didn't want to witness the spectacle. But curiosity is a persistent ghost. It whispers in the quiet moments. What did the world look like now that the truth was out? What did their perfect, curated world look like now that the walls had been torn down? With a trembling finger, I unlocked the tablet. It didn't take long to find. It was everywhere. A viral TikTok posted by my grandson Leo. The video started with a shaky, close-up shot of a cardboard box overflowing with designer handbags. The camera panned up, jerky and nervous, to find Jessica. Her hair was a mess, her expensive silk blouse was stained with what looked like coffee, and her face was a mask of furious disbelief. She was screaming at Mark, who stood amidst a sea of half-packed boxes, his own face pale and slack with shock. "This is all your fault." Jessica's voice was shrill, stripped of the syrupy sweet tone she used for her live streams. This was the real Jessica, the one I knew. You were the one who said to put her in the basement. You said it would be out of sight, out of mind. My fault. Mark shot back, his voice a low growl. You're the one who was mocking her on Instagram Live, while she was having a heart episode. You filmed it for likes, Jessica. You thought this was all a big joke. It was a joke. She was always faking, always looking for attention. $100 million joke, apparently. Mark kicked a box, sending a cascade of expensive shoes tumbling out. We're ruined because you couldn't show an ounce of human decency to your own mother. The camera shook again, and for a second, I saw Leo's reflection in a darkened TV screen. He was just a boy. 16. His face was blank, his eyes hollow. He wasn't filming this with malice or for revenge. He was simply a chronicler of his own family's implosion. He was showing the world the rot that had always been there, just beneath the polished floors and the granite countertops. Across the screen in bold white letters, he had typed a caption that was both a confession and a warning. Grandma was a secret millionaire and we treated her like trash. Now we're getting evicted. Don't be like us. I scrolled down to the comments, my thumb hovering over the endless stream of digital voices. It was a tidal wave. Schadenfreude is my favorite cardio. One comment read with over 50,000 likes. I saw that live stream, another wrote. I reported her, but nothing happened. So glad the universe handled it. Imagine losing $100 million inheritance because you were too lazy to buy your mom her heart medication. Wild. Leo, honey, I hope you're okay. This isn't on you. That last one made my breath catch. Amidst the jeering and the judgment, there was a flicker of compassion for the boy holding the camera. I watched the video again. I saw Jessica shove Mark. I saw Mark throw a framed photo against the wall, shattering the glass. The photo was of them, smiling on a beach, a perfect couple. It was all a lie. Their entire life had been a meticulously constructed stage play, and they had just given their final, disastrous performance. I felt a cold, hollow ache in my chest. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't the sweet taste of revenge they probably imagined I was savoring. It was just sad. It was the brutal, public, and utterly predictable end to a life built on a foundation of cruelty and lies. I closed the tablet, the reflection of my own tired face replacing the chaos of their moving day. I looked out the window at the sun, at the city breathing around me, and knew I had to get my hands in the earth. The community garden was a small patch of defiant green tucked between brick buildings. It smelled of damp soil, of lavender and tomato leaves. It was the smell of life, raw and real. I knelt on a soft foam pad, my fingers still marked by a slight tremor, sinking into the cool, dark earth. The tremor was a part of me now, a physical map of the fear I had lived with. But here in the garden, my hands weren't a sign of frailty. They were tools. I carefully settled a small lavender plant into the hole I'd dug, patting the soil around its base, securing it, giving it a home. Nearby, on a simple wooden bench, Sophia sat reading. Her voice was a soft melody, weaving through the urban symphony of distant sirens and children's laughter. She was reading a book of poetry, something about the sea. She didn't read it to me as if I were a child or an invalid. She simply read it aloud, sharing the words, filling the space between us with something beautiful. Her presence was a quiet anchor in my new untethered world. They thought the fight was about the money. That's what the comments online said, what Jessica and Mark were screaming about in that video. They saw it as a game of inheritance, of winners and losers. They believed my goal was revenge, that I had orchestrated their downfall to watch them burn. They couldn't have been more wrong. The thought of their ruin didn't bring me peace. It was just noise, the final pathetic death rattle of a life I no longer wanted any part of. I didn't want their life to be ruined. I wanted mine back. I wanted to be more than the narcissistic old woman from Jessica's Facebook posts. I wanted to be more than the shadow that haunted their hallways. I wanted to be Leah again. The greatest inheritance David left me wasn't his fortune. For a long time, locked in that basement reading his journal, I was furious with him. He had gambled with my life, used my final years as a litmus test for a daughter he already knew was broken. He had put me through hell to prove a point he'd understood for decades. But now, here with the sun on my back and soil under my nails, I understood. The money wasn't the inheritance. The money was just the key. It was the tool he left me to unlock my own cage. The true inheritance was the chance he gave me, even from beyond the grave, to reclaim my own name. To fight. For 40 years I was a surgical nurse. My hands were steady, sure, and I helped put people back together. Then I became David's wife, then Jessica's mother, then Leo's grandmother. Then, finally, I was just a burden. Problem. A piece of furniture that smelled strange. Each roll chipped away a piece of me until I barely recognized the woman in the mirror. The trial, the fight, the revelation. It wasn't about destroying Jessica. It was about rebuilding Leah. Every piece of evidence Sophia helped me collect, every quiet act of defiance, was me laying a new brick in my own foundation. I pressed the soil down one last time and sat back on my heels, looking at the small, sturdy plant. It would grow here. It would be nourished. It would bloom. It was a simple thing, but it felt like a profound promise. The fortune is gone, turned into a foundation that will protect others from the darkness I knew. The grand house now sits empty, a hollow monument to a family that never really was. Jessica and Mark are somewhere out there, dealing with the echoes of their own choices. I don't know where, and I find I don't care. Their story is over. Mine is just beginning. I am not rich. I am not powerful. I am free.